A very good afternoon to you all. Actually, we are running out of time. Our session is from 1 to 2. Now it is 1:45. So first of all, I congratulate the convener, co-convener, and the organizing secretary, and all those persons who are behind the success of this international conference on Fourth World Literature. So I'm quite happy to chair this session. There are four papers in this session. So instead of wasting time, I think we can move to the first paper. It is by Dr. Shashi Sharma, Assistant Professor, Department of English, Government Degree College, Hackney. He's going to present, Dr. Shashi Sharma is going to present a paper on the woes of Igbo women, reading of Bushi Emecheta's The Bride Prize. I invite ma'am to present her paper. Yes, ma'am, you begin. Yes.
Good afternoon to one and all present.
Yes, you're audible.
Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you're
Good
audible.
afternoon to one and all who are present in this 3-day international virtual conference on the Fourth World Literature. Today, I, Dr. Shashi Sharma from GDC Aknoor, will present a paper on woes of Igbo women, reading of Buchi Emecheta's The Bride Prize. And I have shared the screen also. Now about Buchi Emecheta. Buchi Emecheta, Africa's most prolific female writer, was born in Lagos, Nigeria in 1944. She studied from Methodist Girls High School in Lagos, married Nuduka Sylvester Onwodi before she was 16. She worked for the American Embassy in Lagos for 2 years before she emigrated to England. She left her husband at the age of 22 and had 5 children by that time. She was the author of more than 20 books. She passed away on 25th January 2017 in London at the age of 72. Now, this is the list of books which I would not be, reading out because of time constraint. Now, The Bride Prize. The Bride Prize, published in 1976, is woven around the custom of bride prize, which is a century-old tradition, still practiced extensively in Africa. This tradition specifies that a prospective husband, usually with the help of his family, must provide a certain amount, valued goods or money to his future wife's family before a marriage can be contracted. The price is determined through a formal process of negotiation between the two families. This tradition could be interpreted as purchase-sale transaction, and in some rare but unfortunate cases, some bride families do use it for the sole purpose of enrichment, while some grooms may see it as a right to treat the woman as a purchased good. But the rationale behind it is actually the complete opposite. It is more of a social exchange that brings together the brides and grooms' families. It is a token of this bride prize. It is a token of sincerity and good faith, similar to the modern engagement ring. A superstition attached with the bride prize is that any girl who marries without receiving the bride prize dies in childbirth. Now, Emecheta's The Bride Prize emphasizes the individual's right to freedom of choice. Akuna, she is the protagonist. She operates in a society that places constraints on an individual's concept of life. At 13, after her father's death in modern big city Lagos, Akuna and her brother's name is Nando. Akuna and her brother return with their Mom Blackie, her mother, Akuna's mother, to the rural village of Abusa to live with her uncle Okonko. Okonko is her father's brother, and the name of her father is Onwodi. Ezekiel Odia. Ezekiel Odia is her father, and Okonko Odia is her new father, whom her mother would marry. Now, they return to the rural village to live with their uncle Okonkwo, who claims the family as a rightful legal inheritance from her dead brother. The plot becomes complicated as Akuna falls in love with the school teacher Chike Ofuli and Osu. And Osu is he's an ostracized slave cult. Means he's a slave, he is untouchable, he's dedicated to the gods. So Akuna is from a free family and he's from a safe slave family. So their marriage is not allowed. So he's an ineligible spouse for her, according to Igbo tradition. That Igbo tradition is the tradition of their land. She is abducted by her jealous suitor, Okoboshi. Okoboshi is Akuna's suitor. So she has two boys in her life. She is abducted by her jealous suitor, Okoboshi, who, according to an ancient tribal custom, what is that tribal custom? That, first of all, he will kidnap her and then cutting a lock of hair from her head and then just burying that lock of hair in the soil, he can allow, to be his wife. And then he has to pay a minimal bride price. So this is his plan, that I will abduct her. He has abducted her and then I will cut a lock and then legally she would be my wife forever. Now Chike rescues Akuna. Chike is the teacher. Both of them are in love with each other. It is an affair for them now. Chike rescues Akuna from Okoboshi and his family. Akuna challenges the larger community's will to negate her spontaneous love for Chike. So together, what do? They elope to Ugheli. This is another village, a nearby village. Their union was dangerous. This is to be noticed. Their union was dangerous on two counts. First, it was in defiance of the taboo against an alliance between slave and free families. And second, as a challenge to the old curse that any woman who marries without her family's approval and whose bride price has not been paid will die in childbirth. Okay. Now, on this very important topic of bride price, Margaret R. Law, he evaluates her contribution. Her is Emichita's contribution. He says that, being herself a woman living out of the tribe, because she was living in London. When she left her husband, she moved to London with her 5 kids. And there, being herself a woman living out of the tribal culture, but still touched and affected by her knowledge of it, she brings a special clarity to her treatment of all-important tradition of bride price. For the first time, perhaps, a writer examines this concept from the viewpoint of the person most directly concerned, but least considered. Directly concerned is Akuna, but she's not, nobody is considering her decision. Nobody is considering that she's in love with whom. So she is the person who's directly concerned, but she's not considered. Her thoughts, ideas, what is she feeling inside is not concerned. It is of nobody's concern because it is a community decision there. The story of the bride price is a study of the relationship between the collective traditions of the communal will and Akuna's own strength of will. Her own strength of will is that whom she wants to marry. She wants to marry Chike. And what is the collective tradition? That her aunts, uncles, and parents, what they decide about her. This is the central theme on which Emichita focuses her novel. The narrative, it flows through the her viewpoints of mother, uncle, aunts, cousins. Now, as Akuna evolves from girlhood to womanhood, the rituals, customs, and traditions practiced around her have a strong hold on her mind and subconscious as well. Whatever she sees around, that is seeping in her subconscious. On the surface of it, she fights it by defying the degrading, inhuman traditions and marrying Chike. But at a deeper subconscious level, she's still rooted in that. She wants to marry Chike. She's defying the conventions and traditions of her time. But then those things have seeped in her subconscious. The psychological trap is too strong for her to defy. the things are just, ingrained in her mind that I have done a wrong thing. Akuna is made aware of the lesser status of women because we are dealing with the woes of Igbo women. So, not only Akuna's woes we are tackling, we will be tackling with her mother's woes, all women. Akuna is made aware of the lesser status of a woman like her mother through her surroundings, because when her father was ill, when Ezekiel Odia was ill, her mother was not with the family. She was not with her husband. She had gone to appease the gods because she wanted more children. Because in Africa, a lady, it is the number of children that depicts your richness. If you have many sons and daughters, you are considered a very rich woman. But now, as of now, she has two children. One is Akuna and the other is Nando. So she has gone to appease the gods. So all this is going on, getting ingrained in Akuna's mind. This shows that it is important under the traditional system for a woman to become a mother of more sons and daughters. Okay, I'm skipping certain things, just keeping in mind that other participants should not feel that I'm taking away their time.
Oh yeah.
As Akuna is, when the novel opens, she's 13 years old and she's very delicate, petite, and because she's weak, she catches infection very fast. And her father has named her Akuna. Akuna means father's wealth. How she would become father's wealth? Because when she would get married, the bride price that she will fetch, the money that she will get, it will be used for the betterment of the family. So she is it means father's wealth. Ezekiel Odia's illness and subsequent deaths brings a reversal of fortune in Akuna's life. Had her father been alive, the things would have been different. Now when her father dies, what she tells her brother, Nando, younger brother, it is not that we have no father anymore. We have no parents anymore. Did not our father rightly call you Nando, meaning father is the shelter? So this is another woo for, ladies and of course, children, especially girls, that when their father dies, they have no shelter at all. They become homeless. Now, the tragedy of her father's death has obviously matured Akuna all of a sudden. Now here we see dominant patriarchal trends, that how her mother is treated by the community when her, husband dies. Now, the next is, now there are, when her father's dead body is lying there, her aunts, what do they comment about her? They say that, first of all, that she should not spoil her clothes. She would not be getting any clothes because she has no father. And then one of her auntie, Matilda, what she says, that the bride price that she will fetch will be used for Nando's school fees. So this is, a kind of consolation that they are giving themselves. No, that once she gets married, she will have, money for the family. And one of her aunt, Uzo, says that she, because she is born and brought up in Lagos, she has a refined upbringing, so she will be easily married to a rich man. Now, it also shows that because she is born up in Lagos, like in a modern city, so it means that it also indicates that more bride price. But then when Ma Blackie returns, the ladies, they unthreaded her hair, they stripped her clothes and gave her torn, worn out clothes to wear, and told her to sit on the cemented floor to cry and mourn for her husband. Now, the length of the mourning was slightly longer for her, for 9 months. Why 9 months mourning for her? Because her father, Ezekiel Odia, had cut a lock of hair from her head, and so legally she would remain his wife till his death. And if she does not mourn for 9 months, otherwise it was 7 months. If she did not mourn for 9 months, it meant that she is the cause of her husband's death. So all the traditions are meant to what? Enslave women. Now, after 9 months of this mourning, she is married to Okonkwo Odia, and he is Ezekiel's elder brother. Okay. Now we will not do this. We will come on to this. The whole adult world was becoming complicated because mother getting married to her uncle, her mourning, all that, and then the all of a sudden the people started talking about her bride price show. So the novel is set in early 1950s when Nigerians were opening up to the technology driven living culture of the West. Education, therefore, was gaining ground as something that could serve as a means of prosperity and comfortable life. Okay. Now, because Ma Blackie's kids were, getting education and they were leading a refined life. So Ma Blackie automatically belonged to elite because her kids were getting sound education. Okay. The real reason for Akuna's education is the belief of Okonkwo, that is her stepfather now, that she would fetch good bride price, and that bride price, the money that she would fetch, it would be used for when he would become a Eze, a chief. He would use that money to appease the gods, and then that money would be used for heavy eating and feasting. Now it is, I've told you earlier, she is very delicate, beautiful, but she's lonely also there now. And now she gets attracted to her teacher, Chike. Now, but he is a descendant of a slave family. Free and slave families are not allowed to marry each other. Now, Akuna is not allowed to have any say in her own matters. Now, Okoboshi, a suitor who is aware of the happenings between Chike and Akuna, he kidnaps her. And then for once in her life, Akuna intends to stand up for herself. The ideas in her mind are clear, the plans in her mind are clear, but the tradition is deep rooted in her mind. So she stands for herself, and what she says to that Okoboshi, her suitor who has kidnapped her, "Look at you," she sneered, laughing mockingly. "Look at you, and shame on you, Okoboshi, the son of Obidi. You say your father is a chief? A dog chief, that is what he is. If the best he can manage to steal for his son is a girl who has been taught what men taste like by a slave." So such hard-hitting words he uses, and these words have a definite impact on him. So he leaves her, considering her as a slut. And so he does not bother to cut a lock of her hair. And so this boy, Chike, rescues her and takes her away, where they go to Guheli, where they get married. Now, the difference between Okoboshi's rough and callous, unaffectionate approach is contrasted with Chike's caring and gentle approach. Okay. Now, events move quickly, and Chike dramatically rescues Akuna, and I've told you they get married. Now, Okonkwo could not digest the disgrace brought to his family by her daughter, that is her father, stepfather, that she has eloped with the descendant of a slave family, and falls ill and retaliates on Ma Blackie, that is her mother, and thereby again emphasizing the traditions and customs of Africa. What he does in Ibuza, if a man divorced or no longer wanted his wife, he would expose his backside to her in public, and that is what Okonkwo did. So he left Ma Blackie also. Now events move. He did that. I'm coming on to this. The knowledge that her uncle has not accepted the bride price destroys Akuna psychologically. Though she got married, but that initial enthusiasm, it started ebbing away. Now she is pregnant, but that feeling that her uncle has not accepted the bride price is destroying her. And when Chike's father comes to meet them, she clings to him desperately and says, "I hope I shall see you again," because she has fear that she will die now. She's carrying a baby. "Father, you see, I know my uncle does not want ever to accept bride price. He calls me back in the wind." He calls me back in the wind means he has performed black magic on her. And already she is alone, but I shall never answer. I don't answer whom? I don't answer my stepfather, because he keeps calling me in the wind. This is the psychological fear. "I don't want to die, father." Akuna's delicate health, right from her childhood, pregnancy, psychological fears, they take a toll on her health. Akuna's death in childbirth establishes the strength of the tradition which she defies so strongly. So who won? The traditions. Why the traditions won? Because of her psychological fear. Her death seems to make her rebellion incomplete. So in Lloyd Brown's words, it is itself a demonstration of the degree to which her will is dominated despite her conscious act of, though she revolted, but her will was the same, the traditional, things. So Lloyd Brown in his book, Women Writers in Black Africa, writes, notwithstanding her uncle's malevolent incantations and those omnipotent powers that she's supposed to have defied by her marriage, she literally dies of the fear that the curse will be effective, that she has not, her father has not taken the bride price. And on this basis, her death flows from the novel's central thesis, that fate or destiny in its most significant sense is not based on the mysterious predispositions of inscrutable supernatural forces, but on the function of social institutions and the shaping patterns of cultural traditions. So who won? What won in the later stage? The cultural traditions. So with this, I end. Thank you. I hope I have not, annoyed anyone by taking much of your time.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you for your lucid, for your very, explanations and all. Actually, we felt all of us learned about Igbo culture. We felt as though we are standing with this Nigerian culture and all. So, any questions or any clarification you want to ask anyone, or any suggestions or anything? Any questions, please?
Sagrika was listening so carefully. She was just into it. I saw. It's really nice,
Actually, there's no need for any question because you have given a very detailed account, and also it's a very clear presentation. But still, only one thing I just want to ask. Can you tell us one question? Just I want to ask you. Can you tell any other novels, African novels, where this bride price or this Igbo culture is being depicted in similar way?
No, it is in Slave Girl also. It is in, The Joys of, whatever novel you will take, Buchi Emechita, somehow these things are ingrained in it. The Joys of Motherhood, The Bride Price, The Slave Girl, The Rape of Shavi, whichever novel you pick up, all the books, they deal with it in some form or the other. And I have in the beginning also, I have given you a list of her novels.
Yeah. Okay, ma'am. Actually, we want to talk with you more, but we don't have much time. So, thank you, ma'am, for being here. For your
thank you so much, all of you. Have a nice time. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. We'll move to the next paper. It is the next paper presenter is a research scholar, Sagarika Kotoki, Department of English. I don't know the pronunciation of the name is correct. It is Sagarika Kotoki. The paper is Class and Inequality in Richard Wright's Pagan Spain. Okay. So instead of wasting our time, Sagarika, a suggestion, you please cut short it, and just because lots of paper are there, already the time is given. So just make it short and conclude everything within 10 minutes.
Yeah,
okay,
sure.
No, it's not presenting in the sense. Don't just go on giving all the details. Just
the
gist and the essence of your paper. That would be good. Okay. So,
good afternoon. Yeah, good afternoon, ma'am.
Yeah. Okay. Good afternoon.
Is my voice audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Yeah, and I'm just presenting my PPT. I'm a research scholar from Department of English, Cotton University, and the paper that I'm presenting, the title is Class and Inequality in Richard Wright's Pagan Spain. So this is the overview of my presentation. And to introduce the author and the text, so Richard Wright is an African-American author, and most of his works basically concern racial themes and which are related to the plight of the African Americans, especially in America. And his Pagan Spain, because he is, I'm reading him as a travel writer, and his work Pagan Spain was published in 1957, and it documents as a kind of a travel log. It also documents what Wright witnessed in Spain as a traveler during his visit to Spain. So we know that the genre of travel writing is a very exciting and interesting genre that's very complex, prolific, dynamic, and also socially important because the transaction or the kind of the contact, the traveler and the travelee, how the traveler sees the world and how the world in return sees the traveler is always very very interesting to look at. And when we talk about Richard Wright, because of his identity as an African American and as a traveler, so it makes his travelogues very interesting, worth reading. And there are three works, but I'm focusing only on Pagan Spain. He has other two travel narratives, Black Power as well as The Color Curtain. And the objective of this paper is to examine the politics of class, inequality, religion, and conflict by rereading The Pagan Spain, written by Richard Wright. So this is the statement of my problem that for this paper, we have seen that Richard Wright is traditionally read as a writer who writes for the upliftment of the blacks. But we have seen that as a travel writer, he situates himself, and his travel against the prevalent ideas of nationality, color, race, and identity. So most of his travel writings showcase him as a traveler who is a little bit conditioned because in his ways of seeing the world. And we cannot read him simply as a travel writer. I mean, he becomes more of a critique of the culture, of the places that he visits. So this study uses both post-colonial theories of race, nationality, and identity, as well as Marxist theory of class and conflict. So the primary text is Pagan Spain, and the secondary sources are different library and online resources. And now coming back to the findings and analysis. So this research paper actually makes an assumption or a kind of a presumption. It begins with the assumption that conflict and traveling, they are very, interrelated and instrumental in manipulation of one another. And if we look into people from the first world visiting the third world, or people from the third world visiting the first world. So the idea of representation and seeing themselves or seeing the others, the self and the other. So therefore we see that even Richard Wright's biographer Michael Faber also said that in the book The Unfinished Quest of Richard Wright, that there are two reasons, that this particular work, Pagan Spain, received very cool reception in US. And the reasons are that, the Americans were not interested about Spain. And the second one is that American public did not want to accept the religious perception of a Black American about a white Christian nation. So I have mentioned the other two works of Richard Wright. He traveled to Ghana, and then he also traveled to Asia. And these two places, when he visited, that was different. But he, being a Black American, African American, and going to a white Christian nation like Spain, now his critique was not really accepted. So the African American style of writing about Spain and Spanish culture depicted an escalating solid understanding of the political environment of the country, especially a sense of multiracial existence within that country. So the idea of class conflict, race, and religion all intermix. So for Richard Wright, the post-Spanish ideology is basically pagan. He calls Spain as pagan. So hence the title, Pagan Spain. For instance, in the initial part of Pagan Spain, some of the encounters with the people and culture that Wright had shown the stereotypical image of the Spanish people, as was done by many other travelers or travel writers. And in Spain also, many people treated Richard Wright as a kind of a quote unquote a primitive object of intense attention. When he visited a place, and it is given, I quote from the text, he was scrutinized as an object that was neither human nor animal. So this viewing, the gauge, or seeing the traveler, and Richard Wright, on the other hand, he called Spain as quote unquote pagan. So it's therefore very interesting to see how this politics of understanding the politics, race, culture, class, religion actually work. So Pagan Spain is a book that can be accepted as an anthropological document rather than a travel narrative. Richard Wright, although he claims or he is read as a travel writer, we find that more of anthropological, more of scientific kind of documentation rather than just mere documentation of travel and experience of travel. So Richard Wright experienced the perception of people in Spain about him. At the same time, he has tried to decode and interpret the country and their culture in his own terms. And for him, Spain was a vivid depiction of a post-colonial world. So before that, he visited Africa and Indonesia to attend a Bandung conference. So for him, after visiting Africa and Indonesia and then going to Spain was really very very shocking, because he felt that Spain still needs more in terms of getting civilized, calling them pagan. So the country had not been able to embrace the wave of progress. That's what he felt, and that was prevailing in Europe. So he finds a sense of backwardness in Spain. So I will quickly conclude. So the working title of the book, Pagan Spain, a report of a journey into the past. So he felt that he is not traveling forward, and although he visited a nation, basically Christian and white nation, he felt that he was actually going backward, and it's an illusion of an ironic view of the other phase of the country. So he describes it from the situation of the advancement and observing this foreign culture. And interestingly, being an African, when he was asked by somebody whom he met on the street that, okay, are you from Africa? No, he said, no, I'm from the West, I'm an American. So for him, Spain appeared little backward. So he had just returned from Africa, and when he started drafting the book, so his visit about Spain, right, attempted to change the white concept of Africans in Europe. So being a black explorer of Europe, he tried to form a report on the historically abundant and antediluvian culture of the people of Spain. So thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you a lot, Sagarika, because you have give a gist of us because of the lack of time. But still, whatever you told is very clear. It's a very lucid presentation. You have summed up. The matters. Maybe we can't give you a lot of time. Anyway, it's good. I'll just ask the persons who are here if you have any clarification, any questions, you can ask. Can ask to Sagarika regarding her work. We know that about the class and inequality in Richard Wright's Pagan Spain. Do you want to ask any questions? Audience, any questions? Okay, so we didn't get any response from anyone. So okay, no problem. So yes, I just want to ask you a very simple question. I just want not a very I don't want a very elaborate matter as such. Class and inequality, you're talking about that. So can you find this is the main problem in our country too? So can you find when you read this novel, what are the things you can connect with our country?
Okay, so actually, ma'am, my larger argument is like the people of Spain. When we read Richard Wright, my primary argument for this particular conference is, of course, I limited it to Pagan Spain, but I think that way we can also come to the idea of understanding the poor of the world. So the third world, because this is a conference on fourth world literature, of course. So I think this question is very pertinent, because any work that represents people who are considered underdeveloped. So be it from India, because he has traveled to Asia also, he has traveled to Africa also, and now he is traveling to Spain. So and when we talk about the Asian, continent, and especially a nation like India, so the idea of difference, the rich becoming richer and the poor becoming poorer, is something that we keep on talking about. So I think it's quite relevant, and there is scope for further study also on this.
Okay. Very good. As a research scholar, you have lots of depth, and you're talking in a very detailed manner, and your presentation is very good. Thank you. All the best for your endeavors. Thank you so much. Thank you. We can move to the next paper presenter. That is Ulka Tewari. I don't know how to pronounce it. Assistant Professor, Amity Institute of Communication, Amity University, Noida. She's going to present, the paper title is Representation of Women in Motherhood. Representation of Women in Motherhood. I think she is the, yes? Now I'm inviting Ulka Tiwari to present her paper on representation of women in motherhood. Yeah, she is there, but she is not audible. Yes, Ulka.
Am I audible now?
Yeah, yes. Now you are, yeah, we can see you. You are present, yeah.
Okay. Okay, so
I
thank you.
think you're not audible.
Am I
We
audible now?
What about, yeah, yes, ma'am. Now it's better.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am, but still the voice is not very clear.
Ma'am, from my side,
It's okay, no problem. Okay, ma'am, you continue. Okay, no
okay,
problem.
okay, thank you,
Yeah.
thank you. So first of all, I
Please,
would
10 minutes are given, ma'am.
Yes,
Make
ma'am.
it, yeah, just no need for presenting, just give an essence and a gist of your paper.
Yeah.
Okay, ma'am. Okay, you proceed.
Thank you. So first of all, I would like to thank organizers for giving me an opportunity to present paper, my views in a 3-day international virtual conference on Fourth World Literature on the topic Representation of Women in Motherhood. If you wish to know the culture of any country or community, see how they treat their women. This statement appears to be true and meaningful in all times. Women have undergone some or other kind of tests to prove themselves, which is termed as Agni Pariksha from ancient times even. Agni Pariksha, as the term goes in Hinduism, is normally defined as purity test for women under misunderstanding or suspicion by men. Suspicion is the base for misdeeds among human beings. Numerous suicides and murders around the globe had been recorded due to a mere suspicion or even if the information is not true. And among those death toll, women are the most one end up dead. Contrarily, the deaths of men due to suspicion have been recorded less globally. Hence, it is safer to argue that women are the most affected souls when it comes to proof them against the falsified information. To begin with, Madhowit is a short story collection by Urmila Pawar, originally written in Marathi and translated into English by Veena Dev. She is one of the foremost literary figures in Marathi. Her short stories, though comparatively few in number, have caught the imagination of present day readers as well. And she is well known as an activist in the Dalit and feminist struggles in Maharashtra, and she is an acclaimed short story writer. um, I was listening to the speakers in the morning as well, that some of were of the notion that we should include Dalit literature into fourth world literature, and some are of the notion that it should not be included. But yes, we cannot get away from this thing. And talking about Urmila Pawar's Motherwit, stories never attempted to imply Agni Pariksha as a sin indirectly. The use of language and verses in the stories like I, Vaguely, Sahavbot, Shalya, and Nyai firmly insisted that the men, especially Dalits, treat their women with lesser dignity and no respect. This is not only the case with a specific community, Mahas, to which she belongs, but if we see in totality, it is the mindset of male dominated society. To explain in Ramayana as well, Goddess Sita have been through an Agni Pariksha, and at every step, these days too, women have to go through some kind of Agni Pariksha to clarify their point of view. Now, talking or giving the context of the short stories from Madhawit, in one of the story, Sixth Sense or Sahavbot, the author has explained how a woman is literally murdered through mental torture and depression by her husband, who mistreats her and has suspicion on her character. According to her, a murder need not be carried physically through weapons as instruments. Rather, usage of words, emotions, and other aspects that affect one's lifestyle to end their life is also a murder, which can be termed as emotional abuse. And not only women from Dalit community, but from all the communities, and women in totality again are suffering from this term emotional abuse a lot these days. Through the shorter stories in Madhowit, Urmila Pawar has expressed her discontent that women too have feelings, emotions, dignity, prestige, and not only they should be given respect, but their opinions and work as well. Through Motherwit, she has also tried to bring up that women are always the one who undergo under certain tests or pariksha, but for what they haven't done. Now, in the patriarchal system as well, this has been observed that the oldest and wisest man of the family is the head of the family, and the legacy would be passed on to males for generations. For example, the Rasam Pagri, which still is a tradition or social ceremony in so many Punjabi and Rajasthani Marwadi families, in which the eldest surviving male member ties a turban or pagdi on his head in the presence of the extended family or clan. Pagdi here is considered as a symbol of responsibility. Famous actor Saif Ali Khan was also crowned Pagdi as the Nawab of Pataudis 40 days after the death of his father. Though this system of male dominance might be a family practice in Indian cultures, but there are countries who term it as illegitimate and arrogant act against women. In some other stories, like Vegli and Shalia, the author has clearly explained the facts of Dalit women and how they were treated by men. In Shalia Pain, the mother character Jyoti gives birth to a girl child and was forced to exchange her girl child with a boy child. She undergoes depression, aggression, shame, void, and more feelings that reduced her worth being a woman. In another story, Vaguely, the odd one, the character Nalini, an educated and working mother of a child, faced numerous operations and male dominance from her family and her peers, and then was mentally tortured, which in turn led her to quit her job and marriage. Thus, male dominance in the stories um, is portrayed transparently and clearly through the author's verses and senses that even a layman would grasp this thing with ease. Now, in another story, One in Hand, the author portrays the character Kaki, who suffers throughout her life and is mistreated by everyone as a slave and not a family member. To an extent, in this story, the wife was forced to donate her kidney to her sick in bed husband, who drastically goes under coma stage after the surgery. When later she was ignored by her family in deciding the property rights and ends up with no share, she finally wakes up herself from coma of slavery and then took a decision for herself. Taking another example from one of the very famous story, Deemed Public Disgrace, she has explained the rights of Dalits, social activism, gender, and caste bias in her twisted, humorous ways. For example, her wit in utilizing the words to portray the harsh truth of the society could be witnessed. Like this is a statement from the story itself. This is like a boil on your anus. You can't neither show anyone nor tell anyone about it. The above statement clearly depicts the reality of three Dalit women who were publicly disgraced by upper caste people by pelting and with torn saris for guarding their caste-based children against a feud amongst upper caste children. The story focused on the atrocity and exploitation of Dalit women. Thus, caste and gender exploitation has been and will be an in existence until it is eradicated completely of the humanity. Now, keeping time limit in mind, would like to talk about that in Motherwit, how author has explained the same level of male dominance via her shorter stories, whether the male as a father, a husband, as an in-law, a relative, and a peers possesses the masculine qualities over women and makes them their subordinate. To conclude, I would like to conclude it by saying that the patriarchy system, male dominance, sexual harassment against Dalit women have reduced fairly to some extent, but not completely. To bring the changes into implementation, people of India should accept that people are soul and body and not made of caste or religion. Thus, Urmila Pawar have narrated the ordeals and oppression of Dalit women in such a way that everyone could relate their life to the stories in Motherwit. And the stories not only provides multifaceted appreciation and understanding of Dalit women's lives in different contexts, it also offers insights that suggest ironies and humor, but also pain and abuse. It is a voice of passion for justice, compassion for most characters, which needs to be heard. And at the end, I would like to say that this has not only been limited or confined to Dalit women, but all women's in all communities in all these spheres, personal and professional life, somewhere are facing some kind of emotional abuse. Some definitely are very much bold or have taken a note for themselves that we are going to voice out for this. But yes, there are many communities wherein they have become the silent sufferers, so they need somebody to voice out their opinion for themselves. That is why the author has written shorter stories and not only focused upon one particular community, Mahar, that she belongs to, but she has definitely voiced out opinions for many more other such women's. So thank you so much, the chairperson and the organizers, for this opportunity, and I hope that these things definitely will come to an end someday, and people will realize that we do not have to consider women as an object, but yes, definitely we should, the respect, the dignity what they deserve should be given to them. So thank you so much, ma'am.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Towards the end, whatever you told is really 100% it's the truth. Okay. Even though we think about, we say, women now we have empowered, we got everything. Not about Dalit community as such. There are women, even now, we have certain, so many problems in the working areas wherever we go. So, but Dalit women, they really have lots of sufferings. Okay. So thank you for a very, very clear and lucid presentation. We really learned lots of things. So I think there won't be much questions also. So we can pass to the next paper presenter. So thank you, ma'am, for your, the way you told, even the conclusion, I really appreciate you for that, talking about the problems that we face. I know that's the voice of the voiceless. Okay. So now we have come to such a level so that we can come and talk about these Dalit women. So something will be happen to them. Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Now we
Have a
can
nice
move to the
time.
next. Okay, ma'am. Thank you. Next paper presenter. That is the fourth paper in this session. That is A. Ashmi, research scholar of Bharati Women's College, Chennai, Tamil Nadu. Her paper is Gender Inequality and Polygamy, the images of women in African literature, with specific reference to Mariam Boss. So long a letter. Okay, so long a letter. Now she's going to present her paper. She's already there. Welcome.
Yeah.
Okay, start your session and yeah. Okay, please have the time limit in your mind. So till 5 o'clock we
Okay.
have session, but now it's just we are running out of the time. We have to
Okay.
complete by 2 o'clock. So please give the gist and essence of your paper. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
So good afternoon, everybody. So today I am going to present on gender inequality and polygamy, the images of women in African literature with specific reference to Mariam Abba's So Long a Letter. Mariam Abba is a Senegalese women novelist who has written only two novels like So Long a Letter and Scarlet Song. So this particular novel presents issues like feminism, which addresses selfhood, racial and economic oppression, empowerment, and tragedy of sexual politics. So when you know this, this is the most studied feminist literary works for portraying about the role played by marriage, tradition, and religion in the subjugation of women. So what I have concluded about this, the paper is like women should stand united to overcome the obstacles that they all confront. So with the specific reference to this novel, I have brought out this theme. So Long a Letter is an Islamic influenced patriarchal society where families place a lot of pressure upon young people in order to maintain traditional taboos, norms, and right in relation to marriage. So there are also other themes like you'll come to know about the role of women in the Senegal society, male domination, divorce, motherhood, and widowhood. So when you come to know about Mariam Abba, she is an idol of African literature, and as a writer, she promoted herself as a modern Muslim woman. Her novel attained quick appreciation and have been studied so widely. And this novel has also won a prestigious Noma Prize for her writing. And in this, she was born to a French educated and wealthy family. She was expected to follow the rules of a traditional Senegalese society. She was raised by her grandparents, and they believed that girls should not receive an education. So, with the help of her father, she somehow pursued her higher studies. After her marriage, she was left alone, and this made her to write her first book, So Long a Letter. And so this is an epistolary novel which was written completely in a form of a letter, long letter. It's a conversation between Ramataulai, who's a protagonist, and other character Asaito. So the events narrated in the novel, it explains about the childhood memories and everything about Ramataulai's life from childhood to adulthood. And she is a Senegalese woman writer, and I'm saying about Ba. She's a woman writer, and she used a weapon to fight against the male literary tradition. She speaks about the inequity exposed on women by the patriarchal society, and to advance women's issue in African society. She wrote only two novels, but she remained as a central figure in African literature. So the main theme of the novel is the condition of women in West African society. So through all this novel, in both the novels, she explains the different ways in which women fight for survival in an environment of cultural conflict change. So next, coming about the power of Islamic culture, this is an Islamic novel. So she explains about the Islamic power and patriarchal Senegalese society, and how these both Islamic power and patriarchal society continue to place a lot of pressure and influence the woman in order to maintain a traditional taboo, norms and privilege when coming to marriage. Um, and if you see, in order to establish forms of education which meet their real needs, women have to make use of their right to elect their fellow women and enlighten men to political position through which they will achieve the power to have a positive impact on the systems and structure within their communities and society that restrains women's empowerment. So in this novel, there is also an importance given for education, because both the protagonists in the novel are educated and they stood alone even after their husband's death. But when you compare other Islamic novel Egyptian novel Nawal El Shaddai's Women at Point Zero, there the protagonist is not very much educated, and so you can see a different change in the novel. Here, the author has given a different image of women in African society, particularly Senegal. So it explains about the friendship that exists between two women, Ramataulai, who is in Senegal, and Dasaito, and she's from United States. It was narrated in a form of long letter, and it reminds her about the friendship that goes on, it was the friendship that comes back as their grandmothers, mothers, and their shared childhood. So the portrayal of women described in the novel that is used that is explained is like women have to participate in the society. So Long a Letter has also explained that more and more women are gaining realization of their hardship, and they are choosing to oppose it. In terms of education, the women in the novel are portrayed in ways they reflect a real life situations, in that some are educated while others are not. So in So Long a Letter, so the major theme focuses on religion, and excuse me. Yeah. The major, it focuses on religion and Islamic religious tradition. So there are a lot of echoes of Islamic teaching surrounding recurrently in her novels. Um, and there are also few characters like Ramataulai's husband and her friend Asaito's husband. So she lost her husband, and in that letter, Ramataulai explains about her life history to Asaito. It focuses on their happiness, sadness, and the shared experience of their husband marriages to other wives, are reinforced by Islamic religion. And we know that polygamy is widely spread in African society, especially in Senegal, Nigeria, and everywhere. In every novel, you can find the polygamy is one of the main themes. So the women represented in the novel have a good level of education. So in the light of this aspect of portrayal of women, African women writers contribute to the importance of education, the sovereignty of women. And So the other protagonist, Ramataule, she describes that even after 20 years of independence, there is no single female minister who is involved in the decision which is concerned about the development of the country. Excuse me. The connection between education, power, and culture is exposed to our Saital's portrayal. She receives good education and she leaves a polygamous husband. She's able to get her job as an interpreter in the United States, and she does identify her own self, and she empowers herself by the means of education. And her way of education and liberation is has she got through the way how she was educated, because only through education she can come out of her betrayal husband and she can stand alone. So she didn't give importance like she doesn't respect she doesn't represent the subjugated women. So in this novel we can also find three women who are educated and attentive of their social circumstances, and as a result they have a tendency to react to their situation. And there is also one more character, Daba, and who is Ramataule's daughter. She is also more independent and educated woman. So by seeing her mother is being tortured, she requests the mother to divorce her father, and she accepts the young girl Vinito as a second wife, she says. And there is also so many instances you can see that she gets married to a man who respects her and treats her equally. So they're both the characters in the novel. They use their power of education to free their minds. So this is my presentation is about. I have focused on education. So thank you.
Okay,
I'm
Ashmi,
sorry
thank
for
you.
interrupting. I had a daughter coming in between, so I was not able to make continuity.
It's not at all a big problem, actually.
Yeah.
Thank you for giving a very detailed account of this. Even though because of this time limit, you just you have given the essence, but still we can very clearly understand what the novel is about so long later. So it is a semi-autobiographical novel.
Yeah.
Am I correct? So
Yeah,
what
yeah,
kind
ma'am.
of autobiographical elements, because when we say an autobiography, it's about that author's experience in life,
Yeah.
So what kind of an autobiographical elements are here in this novel? Can you take
Okay.
one or two instances?
Yeah, I'll explain. Like when Mariam Abba was married, she was left by her husband, and when she wrote her book, it was burned by her husband. So similarly, in the novel, there is a character called Ramataulahi, and she got married and she was betrayed by her husband. So her character is been Mariam Abba's character is been depicted in the form of Ramataulahi's character. So that is the one thing. And education, she got educated. Mariam was educated, and that's how she stood for herself. In the same way, both the characters Ramataulaye, Asharita are educated and they stood for themselves. So these are few instances.
Okay. Thank you for giving me
Yeah.
the correct answer for that. So
Yeah,
Ashmi,
thank you.
for your future endeavors, you are a research
Thank
scholar,
you,
so I
ma'am.
just wish you all the best. Okay, thank
Thank
you
you.
for all the
Thank you, everybody.
all the four paper presenters for whom I chaired this session. Thank you for the organizers who have given this opportunity to me. Thank you, one and all. And now we move to the next segment. Okay, with other chairperson and also with other paper presenters. Thank you.